welcome to this special preview version of our full-length ABA Inside Track Book Club episode for spring 2020. For new listeners out there, every season we do a full-length book club, sometimes 2+ hours, where we discuss a book related to behavior analysis. And this season we decided to join in the renewal of the spring by reading Anthony Biglan's The Nurture Effect. We really enjoyed this book, as you will hear in the preview. It's me, Jackie, Diana, and Alan all coming together. We hope you enjoyed this little snippet of kind of our initial thoughts on the book. If you're interested in hearing the full book club, then that is available for our premium Patreon subscribers only. So you can go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track right now and subscribe at the $10 level to gain access to the full-length book club discussion, plus to all of our previous book club discussions, which include some episodes that have yet to be unlocked, like Look Me in the Eye, as well as Nudge, the behavioral economics book. And as a bonus to any of our Patreon subscribers, you're able to get 2 CEs for listening to our book clubs at no additional charge. Now, if you just say, I like this preview and I'm very patient, these will eventually come out in the free feed. But if you don't want to wait, or if you say some extra CEs sounds good to me, plus some of the extra bonuses you get for joining us on Patreon, like episodes a week ahead of time, some live Q&As, and a chance to vote on episodes every season, well, then why don't you just head on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And without further ado, here's a brief introduction to our book club on The Nurture Effect. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to ABA Inside Track Book Club, the book club podcast that's like reading a whole book, but in your car, but safer. Did that one work? It was my new intro for our book club episode. What do you think?
It.
It was good? Okay.
I really do.
Smooth.
Okay, good. Welcome. I'm joined as always at book club by my fabulous co-hosts.
You know, it's me, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana.
And book club guy, Alan.
Alan, I was going to say, I want you to be your fabulous co-host because you've done so many of these. But if you weren't going to, I would give you a separate name. You'd be our book club buddy. It was my working title. No, okay, I'm getting the no.
I like book club guy. I like book club guy.
Book club guy.
Book club guy, Alan. We're gonna make him a card.
Oh yeah, you put that right under your name.
He'll just show up at all book clubs. It doesn't matter what you're reading. He'll just show up and trash the book and then leave. Just kidding.
All right, next season we'll do 50 Shades of Grey.
We're gonna have a positive book club experience.
I think it's a positive book. Well, before we talk about whether we're positive or negative on the book, I want to remind our listeners that this is our podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic books. And if you're listening to this in the spring of 2022, it means you are one of our Patreon supporters, and we thank you so very, very much. If you're listening to this in the far distant future, I really hope that you're like the Nurture Effect. You mean the thing that we all do every day and the government banded together and got over its bipartisan crap to implement all of these things? Oh yes, what a wonderful world we live in. Though I fear that you'll just be listening to this in 2023 and saying, oh, things are worse than ever, and the Nurture Effect 2 didn't have the effect we thought. But, let's not be pessimistic, because we'll be talking about the book The Nurture Effect today. And that is The Nurture Effect, How the Science of Human Behavior Can Improve Our Lives and Our World by Anthony Biglan. And this was voted on by patrons from books about, it was sort of the general theme was ACT, but this one sort of snuck in as a general wellness, help the world book, but there are plenty of ACT discussions within the book too. So I think it squeaks by in the original poll. So we're going to be talking about that today. So why don't we start with kind of some general thoughts on the Nurture Effect, on kind of your general, what had you read it before? Is it something that you were interested in reading, and whether it lived up to your expectations?
Well, I like to judge a book by its cover, even though you're advised not to. And I've always liked the cover of this book, which is like a nest with the earth in it. Is that right?
Kind of.
That's exactly
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a mossy nest.
It kind of looks like the earth has sort of been smooshed a little bit, though. I always thought that's what it was. It was a smooshed earth.
No, it's an egg.
It's an egg earth.
It's an egg earth in a nest.
Okay.
And so I find the cover quite appealing.
Okay.
And then not only did I like the cover of the book, I liked the contents of the book as well.
That's good.
So there's my book report on The Nurture Effect by Anthony Biglan.
But
I
don't
give you
take
an
my
A.
word for it. Bip.
I give you an A, Diana. That was
Thank
a
you.
good book club report. I read this book initially after I saw Dr. Biglan present at a conference, and I thought that maybe I wanted to replace a book in my radical behaviorism class for this book. So I read this book. I didn't replace it, but I think, there are some really key points that I am excited to talk about in this book. Overall, I was like, yep. But I also really know about behavior analysis, right? So I think there was like, if this is not like doesn't say like behavior analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I like, because then, and the cover, I also like the cover too, Diana. Mine's got coffee on it, which is funny because I don't even drink coffee. So I'm not sure who spilled coffee all over it.
It was me.
But I like that I could see this book appealing to a broader audience than
That's
just
the
behavior
idea.
analysis,
Yeah.
right? But I can see the infusion of behavior analysis very strongly throughout the book, which I appreciate, right? And for me, sometimes I was like, of course, while I'm reading, but again, I'm a behavior analyst, right? And this is what I do. So that's kind of my behavior analytic book club takeaway.
Yeah.
All right. How about you, Alan?
Well, I think I'd read a chapter or two, but never the whole book. I'm glad to have read it, but I can't say it's my favorite book. Again, I
Someday we're
appreciate
going to
it.
read your favorite book.
I know I'm pretty hard to please sometimes. It reminded me of when we read Nudge, and it was hard for me to know who the audience was because he's casting such a wide net that it feels like he falls short in several places because he doesn't pursue an avenue of thinking or argument because he would probably lose some people, and I totally get that. I think it does a good job of introducing people to sort of behavior analytic thinking without just having all of our jargon throughout all the time on every page. So it's very accessible. I could give this to some of my friends and be like, hey, if you kind of want to know how behaviorism and my job inform my outlook on the world, here you go. But I think that there are areas where, as a writer, he could have done things differently, especially since it was written in 2015. It felt a little like, here we're talking about this nice new behaviorism, and the year's 1975, because he's just so enthusiastic about it and doesn't address some of the shortcomings about our history that I think are important to remember, and almost whitewashes over them, I'm afraid. So I would never recommend this book, like, alone. So...
You mean reading it alone? You're like, you should always read with a buddy. I'm just kidding. But wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah, well, most people I know probably wouldn't read this without me being like, now why am I reading this? So,
That's what the point of book club is, right?
yeah, true.
Yeah.
The buddy system.
I think I found, this happens sometimes when we either have a book or like a series of episodes coming up. And so, when we're recording this, we've recorded a number of episodes or in the process of recording a number of episodes specifically talking about prevention and nurturing, trauma-informed treatment, which I think kind of falls into that same category of, trying to build a nurturing relationship. So I think this book sort of hit when everything I was reading was pointing to this idea of prevention as an important goal for our society rather than waiting for things to fail. It's okay. I think when I think about it long enough, that's probably been my attitude to a lot. And I think issues of scaling. And one of the things I think this book does well, in that it doesn't cover any one topic particularly in detail, and some areas I think it goes into maybe too much detail for the average reader, but it really does try to start small to hook people in and then get bigger and bigger in terms of its scope. So there's something about sort of the narrative device of starting with, we'll talk about like in chapter 1, the mother and the baby, that's the first relationship, and what are the systems and what are the preventative programs that might support improving that relationship. and how does that improve outcomes later on, and then getting into the family, and then getting into schools, then getting into peer groups, then getting into larger society, then getting into capitalism, and getting into, the not exactly the war on poverty, but sort of the idea of, poverty as a real epidemic in our society, and what can we do about that, and then sort of wrapping it all up in 220 pages. It's a pretty quick read overall. So while I think, yes, if you were a behavior analyst and you want a lot more detail, I definitely found sections of this book where I felt like, Biglan sort of is like, this is a great program. Anyway, here's another one. And then there were others that he spent more time on. So he spends a lot of time on the good behavior game because, he works with people, still who do research on the good behavior game. So he had more information there. Others, it feels like he's like, someone told me about this program and I looked into it and it seemed pretty good. So your mileage may vary as to the individual recommendations in the book. But I think the theme is important. And I think I mentioned this to you the other day, Diana. We were watching a movie, and I think you're critiquing me for something. I was being too conservative, or something about that. And I said, I don't know, Diana, between the nurture effect and all the topics we've been doing, I feel like half of the things I believed for my entire adult life are out the window and wrong, and I'm having a real moment. So forgive me, everyone, if I break into tears in our book club or start, rending garments, because I'm all in on nurturing and preventative care and helping people in a way that I don't think I was in my 20s or 30s when I was, very conservative minded.
What was the thing that I was presenting to you?
I don't know. I think I said I wanted to keep Ronald Reagan as a president I liked, even though he is behind a lot of things that if I think too much on, not good. But you know what? I want to keep that illusion. I'll throw out everything else I believe, but let me keep that one. Can I keep that one? Was that not it?
No, I don't know. I can't remember. It was something like very innocuous.
Okay.
I love that word, innocuous.
I'll try and remember. It was better than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was not totally off topic. Ronald Reagan, not by name, but does come up in the context of the nurture effect when we talk about capitalism run amok. All right, so overall, some general positive vibes, though I think our mileage varied a little bit, which, it wouldn't be an ABA Inside Track book club if we didn't have some variation, which is good because it makes for a much better discussion than if we all just gushed or hated on any one book. So let's talk about the author very briefly. The author is Anthony Biglan, who has been in the field of psychology and behavioral science, i.e. behavior analysis, for over 30 years. He works at the Oregon Research Institute, which the way he describes it makes me think Oregon must be some sort of a paradise where they've solved all of these social problems. I don't know. Oregon listeners, please write in. A lot of his claim to fame really came in to his work on preventative work towards cigarette smoking or smoking cessation, and many of the trials that tobacco companies and the marketing firms that support tobacco companies were on. He had to look at all that research and present papers. And over the past number of years, he's become, a big proponent of preventative care. He's been involved in the Society for Prevention Research, the Institute of Medicine Committee on Prevention. If it has prevention in the title, I think Anthony Biglan must somehow be involved with the group. And as much as, when someone says, I've been doing this for 30 years, you get the sense like, oh, the nurture effect, that must have been the culmination of his career and we'll never hear from him again. Wrong! This dude's still publishing. I went to a website that he started called, where is it? Values to Action, which is even more, if you thought the nurture effect was sort of like not quite as, progressive as you'd want, well, the Values to Action website seems much more anti-capital, maybe not anti-capitalism, but like really is taking a hard stance about a lot of the things that we think of as sort of part of American society. Probably they shouldn't be. And it's the website states that it is working to support a less toxic society. And they set up these action circles, which is some sort of a Swedish idea they said on the website, where individuals can join these small groups to work on parts of bigger problems. It sounded very interesting. I did not join. However, I did purchase a copy of his most recent 2020 book, Rebooting Capitalism. So I got that coming in the mail to me. But in the meantime, he's also published, continued studies on the good behavior game, on, I don't know how he can keep writing about nurturing. I feel like he said a lot of it in this book, but he's still publishing articles and some of the adolescent and child psychology journals about nurturing. So he is still very active in prevention, and I suppose will be for 40 years.
He's a clinical psychologist. Is that his?
That was his, yeah, this is his background. Yeah, but he's a behavior analyst, though he never mentions it by name. When this book came out in 2015, it was, I try to find reviews at the time because I'm always curious, like, what are the reviews for scientific books like this? Do they even get reviewed? Scientific American said it was very good. They gave it a good review. And the behavior analyst actually reviewed it. Derek Reed reviewed the book. He said it was the most kind of understandable description of ACT he had read in a long time. So he was very, very positive there. He felt it really kind of went up there with, and I'm paraphrasing very broadly, so you should go read The Behavior Analyst in 2015 if you want Dr. Reed's exact words. But he felt it really kind of covered a lot of the same ground and then brought forward more information that, say, Skinner's old works on how we can change society, and then Coercion and its fallout, which was a subject of a previous book club. With ACT sprinkled in was kind of my takeaway from his review. Though he did mention, and was a little sad, he was trying to make it not sound like he was sour grapes, but the word behavior analyst or behavior analysis was only mentioned one time in the entire book, even though there were some references to Java itself. And while Derek Reed doesn't say like that's a huge problem, he does feel it was a missed opportunity because Biglan's clearly a behavior analyst to not mention behavior analysis with the book to sort of kind of get the word out about behavior analysis out there. And it is one of those situations I never quite understand why behavioral science among some circles, it's like, we don't want to say behavior analysis because that'll turn off the audience, but behavioral science, that's the term. I never quite understand that.
I can see that, right? We don't have the best following right now, right? We're classically in the history of psychology, we're the scapegoats, right? Whereas behavioral science isn't.
I like the term behavioral science.
I do too. I like it a lot.
Probably the better. It seems like the more marketable term.
Well, and it also puts us in a context of a community of practitioners rather than claiming all the credit, which I think used to happen far more often and probably still far too often. Whereas behavior science as a phrase includes people who like the early intervention, naturalistic behavioral developmental intervention people. They're like, we're not really behavior analysts, but we use behavioral analytic principles in forming our theories. Like we are part of the same community, even if they are not exactly what we are. And so I'm all for that. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that point, Alan. Just in terms of the increased inclusivity, I think it is something that as a field you're seeing more in some of the kind of the new areas of research where we don't have any practice to pull from within behavior analysis. So we're looking into psychology, nursing, and other fields to really kind of inform our advances. And I do think I agree. I think that is the way to go. I don't see any point in making enemies with our terms, and it's not going to lead to any of the gains brought forward in the nurture effect. That's for sure. Because I think one of the other sad things about reading this book is while there are so many great ideas, it is very hard not to read it and say, well, geez, if everybody knows the answers to all of society's problems, why is everything such a freaking mess still? And while I think the book does work very hard to speak to a very broad audience, to the point that there are sections at the end called action implications where they're like, hey, did you like this chapter? Well, if you're a parent, here's some things you could do. If you're the president of the United States, here's some steps you might want to take. Really is trying to give everyone some things that they can proactively do to support this work. But then you sort of get the sense, maybe it's different in Oregon, but I get the sense here of like Anthony Biglan could come give a talk and everyone would be like, yeah, okay, thank you. And just sort of continue on with the way they've been doing things. So it was really hard not to get a little down in reading this book. You'd read a positive idea and then say, well, no one's going to do this. And then read another positive idea and say, I don't think anyone's going to do this.
It did feel discouraging in that there are so many areas in which, a lot of his points here are that there should be, policy level changes and influence. And there's so many areas that the people that know what could be effective and what types of changes could be made have none of that influence. And it seems like such a long shot for any of those types of, policy changes to actually occur. That felt discouraging to me, even knowing that there's the scientists out there and like some like germs of research have been conducted. And I know I talked to you about this too. I was like, there was, the whole like long-term project looking at direct instruction in schools and how we know that that's more effective than other strategies for teaching, but it was never adopted in our education system for whatever reason. So that to me feels discouraging. Like, even if you know what might be effective, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And I think that the work that we do in, working with individuals with disabilities is really important work. So I don't want to discount that, but there's all these other areas that are in all of these chapters here. It's like things could be done better, right? You don't have to call it behavior analysis. It's just things could be done so much better. And no one's out there doing it, and no one's attempting to exert influence in those spheres. Mm-hmm. But it would be the changes that would need to occur aren't even necessarily that difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of the subtext of the book too, especially when you get to the later sections when they're talking about marketing, they're talking about the current form of capitalism. You do get a sense of everyone who is interested in change is powerless, because the people who have all the power have zero interest in promoting a society that would follow along with any of these recommendations, because it is directly counterproductive to their stated goals. The idea of a business it's illegal for a business to not continue to make more money every single month. Like, what? I just thought that was sort of like a bad idea someone came up with. The idea that it's illegal to have stockholders and to not do everything in your power to make more money every quarter is disgusting to me. As someone who owns tons of crap and likes buying things to fill the giant hole in my censure, I'm disgusted by this idea.
Exhibit A. Exhibit B.
Not everyone can see. We moved the camera too, so everyone can see the shelves. But it did feel like a real, let's speak truth to power, and they won't even bother hearing us because what do they care? We're still going to buy their crap. And so,
I always thought that phrase meant that if you spoke the truth, that it would blossom into power.
No,
you would speak truth into power.
I think it's like a child looking up at
now I
think
I understand. You say to the people who have the power, you tell them the truth, and it's supposed to change their mind.
And they walk right past you.
Yeah. Okay.
Or have you killed or something. I don't know what they do. I don't have any power, so.
I do think there's another component, though, in addition to like policymakers and people in power. But I think there's also some conversations within our community and with our own historical and current clients and families that we need to address and resolve. Talking, the book goes into about like coercion and things like that. And those are conversations we're having right now. And so if we can resolve those, then maybe we will all be able to actively promote some of these ideas together rather than sort of not infighting, but having we have a lot of criticism that we need to take before we can get people behind these ideas on a larger scale.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a really good article that was just written along those same lines in the most recent issue of Behavior Analysis and Practice. I probably should have looked up the name because now it's escaping me. It's like they have a voice. Are we listening?
Oh yeah,
it's so good, and it kind of hits that. I think all the points that you just brought up. Alan.
Do you remember the authors?
I'm looking it up right now. It's early issue. Or Early View. I love Early View. Early View is the best. It is by Venezano and Shea. They have a voice. Are we listening? Behavior Analysis and Practice 2022.
I'm going to critique them right now. They should have saved that title for the book that they wrote after the paper. That's too good. You can't waste on a research article.
It is so good. That is a great title. I hope that they thought of that in the shower or like while they were sleeping.
They were told, no, they were jamming. They were jamming on their research. I don't know if it's a survey or review of the research, but they were totally jamming on. They were like, it's like they have a voice. Wait a minute, say it again. It's like one of those in the biopic of the writing of the article. That scene will be in the movie. All right, well, so I think, and as much as I feel like I'm sounding so doom and gloom, I did read this over our April vacation, and I returned to work in a really good mood. And I don't think it was because I got a lot done over April vacation, because it was somewhat stressful of a vacation. But I feel like I read this book and I came back saying, you know what I want to do? I want to help people again. Because I was feeling a little burnt out through February through March. I don't know if listeners could hear it, but I was getting really down. And I did feel a little rejuvenated by the idea of we can solve problems. There are solutions, whether or not everyone's going to listen to them or be interested in them. At least they're there, right? We know more now than we did 40 years ago. And we understand who is not interested in that change and why they might not be interested in that change, because we understand human behavior. And it's not a bad thing to want to proactively support other people. Because for years, I was very much, I was one of those kids who, when I'd read all my, papers in my psychology undergrad, and they'd talk about, correlation, like, people, families with low socioeconomic classes, have children who tend to, struggle more or engage in more criminal behavior later on. And my take home for that is like, well, what are you going to do if the poor people, they just do bad things? And I totally missed the point of, no, it's not that they do bad things. It's like part of them. It's because there are activities we could do to support those families. It's correlational. And I think this book got me many years later, and I'm very embarrassed that it took me so many years to really put it all together. There are things that we can do to support people in need, rather than just sort of shrug and say, well, they're going to have problem kids, and they're going to not make a lot of money, and they're not going to provide. It's like, no, that's missing the point of, allowing systems that fail to just continue on and wait until they fail to say, let's act now, when it's hard and expensive and it's potentially not, the return of investment starts lowering. And why are we waiting? Why can't we do these things early? So I was very much in the mood to make some significant changes in life. And we'll see if that makes it through the rest of the school year. But, right now, at least, I'm very pumped, very excited.
Yeah. But, it's good that you have been able to think about that differently. But I also think that that's a product of our society and the way that often we are taught to think, and how our society does not support these types of prevention programs and or individuals who need support.
The phrase, they gotta learn, in a very coercive context comes to mind. And made to Rob too, since he still works in schools. That's a phrase I always loathed, because it meant that it was their responsibility, not our responsibility, to teach and aid and support and nurture. But rather the fault of the person in need for not having skills that no person learns alone. So
it's very true. All right, well, let's enough of me waxing philosophical. Let's get into some details about the book. So first off, for folks who are thinking about reading this book, I kind of mentioned it already. I really like the organization of the book. And while I feel like those of you who read a lot of papers, read a lot of books like this, I'll be honest, you could probably read like the first 2/3 and then sort of put it down and say, all right, that's good. I got everything out of it. Because it does start with, what the basics of behavior analysis, which you could skip that section, though I think it is worth talking about a few differences in why this is a book about behavioral science rather than purely behavior analysis. Then
it's not like Coercion and its fallout.
No,
like that.
Which like, who is this?
The level
this is for
of detail that Sigmund
analysts.
did in that book. It's nothing like that.
So amazing, but it is not for anyone but behavior analysts. Then part 2 gets into
like time for some rat research.
I like that section. That's my favorite section of that book.
Sorry.
No problem. Part 2 gets into sort of, the microcosms of change, starting, like I said, with, mother and infant, to young children, to teens, to schools, to peer groups, to larger, neighborhoods, right? And then part 3 gets into the more large scale, how do, specifically American, but how do American components really fail to nurture our citizenry through capitalism, and not just capitalism, but through kind of the bastardization of capitalism that has occurred in the past 40 years. And
unbridled, I believe, is
unbridled capitalism. And then it kind of comes back to a part 4 where there are a couple nice touchy-feely phrases, but to be honest, it really just reiterates exactly what you've read about in the book before. So again, if you have not a lot of time and you're like, if only I had a book that were like 170 pages about about nurturing, great, just read this book and you can skip the last section. It just cycles back, which I guess if you were not a behavioral scientist or in the field, I could see how having those nice sum-up sections would really be a great way to sort of reiterate the main points when you may have lost it when they're like, the Triple P parenting program. Like, there's too many programs.
You know what's funny is that now that I'm thinking about it, the first time I read it, I actually stopped right around the 180 page point because I was like, oh, this is the summary. And I like skimmed through it. But then I was thinking, isn't that what professors do? They like bring up all their points and then bring it along home. So
bring it on home.
Right? So what he's doing is just making sure that everybody gets the main takeaways. So you could either read the first part of the book or the second part. You can choose.
I would say if you are new to behavioral science, you might want to start with part 4 and then come back. If you are listening to this podcast, though, you're probably going to want to read the first 2/3 of the book.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up that it actually sort of goes to the point of this is maybe a marker of one of his intended audience. I mean, Jackie, you said that you'd considered replacing it in your syllabus as using it as a replacement. Well, that section is like, oh, this is aimed at like psychology students, potential behavior analyst students, because it has that sort of textbook academic format of like, here's the meat and then here's the like framework for a study guide.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
But if you do not read the last chapter, though, you will miss maybe the cheesiest section of the book in which Anthony Biglan describes, it's like a 2-page scenario of what he hopes the future is like with nurture, which was, if he, depending on, I don't know him personally, but like the picture they have at the back of the book, it's like, oh, thank you so much for your.
Maybe he wrote that first. Maybe it was
maybe.
So when
his dream journal.
I used to do creative writing, and we would have an exercise where you had to write for 5 minutes straight, and you couldn't pick up your pen from the page, right? You had to continue writing the entire 5 minutes. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was one of those exercises, and that's what he produced.
Maybe.
And it was the impetus for the whole rest of the book.
It was very cute, except for the part where he talked about the wellness. He talked about the National Wellness Index started in 2020, to which I just thought, we didn't do jack in 2020. I know you can't look 5 years in the future, Dr. Biglan. I know,
when he was talking about
but it really brought me out of your
epidemiology and stuff.
Yeah.
I went back to see when the book was written. I was like, oh.
Yeah, it really brought me out.
He probably wishes he could update that.
Brought me to the future. Exactly, I know. It's not his fault. It's 2015. He didn't know. He didn't know. All right. So let's briefly talk about chapter 1, which is my favorite because it's part 1, chapter 1. It's the only part. It's the only chapter in the part. So you really feel like you're flying through the book already.
I wonder why that happened. I actually wondered that too. I wonder why that was decided to put the book into parts when it really was just a chapter.
I mean, I think the parts read well in terms of I want something that's practical for me as an individual versus I want something that's looking at a more societal wide scale. And then you need to have a chapter in which you're like, here are some basic terms and some basic principles you're going to want to know. And it just sort of made sense to put it in as its own part in its own chapter.
Okay.
Study guide.
So I expected this section to really just go hard into like, and then B.F. Skinner did the end. It wasn't. Skinner gets mentioned. It's very mostly positive mentions. There's one kind of cryptically negative mention, which if we get to, I might bring up. But really, Tony Biglan starts by talking about evolutionary theory, which I don't know if I was just expecting to read a more behavior analytic book, but talking about Darwin and evolutionary theory, that really threw me for a loop in terms of I had never really thought about evolution as kind of a component or as possibly as a forerunner of some behavior analytic thought before. I mean, I thought about evolution in terms of passing my biology AP.
Don't you think about selection?
Selection, no, but exactly. I never thought about it I never thought about
You didn't take
selection
my
by
class.
consequence. I didn't take your class. No, I'm sorry. I didn't take your class. I never thought about selection by consequence. Would it be awesome or would it be unethical?
No, I said awkward.
Oh, how
Awkward.
awkward would it be? I got an in with the professor, folks. Ugh.
No, thank you.
No, geez, sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
I never really thought about selection by consequence when it comes to natural selection as having anything to do with behavior selected by consequence. I just always thought of them as I never thought of them as related. I just thought of them as two separate things in two separate contexts.
Right. So we talk about, phylogenetic selection, which is like Darwin type of genetic selection, and there's ontogenic selection, so behavior that's selected for within your lifetime, and then there's cultural selection, so behavior that's selected by the community as a whole, and that's where all of your social rules and mores and higher level things come into play.
And it's also a good link for like our link to developmental psychology and for especially like attachment theory and some of that, which again, we're having those conversations within our field now, but it's good that it's a big umbrella because it's not just about ABA.
Very true. That's why I guess we put ABA in the title of our podcast, but we probably should have put something less specific because it's not always what we talk about. Mostly what we talk about, I guess.
Mostly. Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah, like 99%.
99%.
They mostly come at night, mostly.
Oh my God, Alan, that's exactly what I was thinking. 10 points for you. 10 reference points. Hey, thanks for checking out a preview of our full-length The Nurture Effect book club. We hope you liked what you heard and maybe think about going and subscribing right now on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track for access to any of our locked content, plus a chance to earn free CEs for listening to episodes like this book club. Not this preview of the book club, but the real full-length book club, as well as a chance to vote on episodes and some other fun goodies, some live Q&As from speakers. We really try to make sure that is well worth your while, so please check us out. Patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. All right. And with that out of the way, we bid you a fond goodbye.